Thank you for the quick setup, Commissioners. Good morning. So yes, we are here for the SMMP final report from our consultants. I'll let them introduce themselves in their presentation. So wanted to, more for the audience, I gave a larger, longer, more in-depth background last week. If you want to hear about that, we're online. But just want to kind of set the tone very quickly, and then we'll let Joel and Liz take the show. What a difference a year makes. This time last year, Bailey, Rick, and I were finalizing the contract with Joel, Bryce, and RRS, and then Liz subsequently. And we asked them to looking at the research, the technical assistance, facilitation, and staffing to move this process forward. Just in 2 short weeks, Bailey and I began our listening session on July 2nd. We talked to more than 40 regional elected officials, staff, so-called Baileys, experts, innovators, state officials, DEQ, governor's office, to make sure we understood the entire region system and not just one place. And all that led up to our kickoff on October 21st. And again, since then, we've had 4 more task force meetings, 21 subcommittee meetings, and we're going to dive into those details as we move forward. But what I did want to do is just kind of set the tone of why we're here. So the principal focus of this entire initiative was to address, explore, and find solutions. And that's really what this whole thing was. How can we as a region work together to deal with these systemic challenges? And I just want to say solutions again, and also collaboration. This is probably one of the 2 most profound experiences I've had in my career. We never heard the word you, like you got to do this and you got to do this. It was always a we. I think a lot of that was Liz's facilitation acumen, but also the people in the room. Everyone was just really looking at solutions to, regional-wide systemic challenges. So in essence, we had 2 questions to answer. How can our region support state efforts to reduce material generation and increase sustainable materials management? In our climate crisis, we cannot solar panel our way out, and in this regional sustainable materials and waste management, we cannot recycle our way out of this issue. So that's why we had 3 of the 4 subcommittees looking at material management. Second question was, how can we proactively prepare for when Coffin Butte shuts down? Our region, including the coast, we do not have the infrastructure, and we are not prepared for that switch to flip, for lack of a better term. Then that was the focus of the 4th subcommittee. So I just want to kind of give you all the 2 fundamental principles of why we're here, and then I'm going to hand it over to Joel to dive into the details. Sorry.
Thank you, honorable commissioners, for having us, and staff as well. We're really excited to be here today and talk about the Sustainable Materials Management Plan that we had the honor to work on with Sean and Bailey and other folks representing. So just to kind of give you an overview of what we're going to be sharing with you today is really an overview and setting the materials in context for Oregon and really our waste system, especially in this region, and how it's all interconnected. So, it's not just Benton County waste, it's how it all flows in and out, and really coming up with reasonable solutions that folks can play off of each other's synergies. And then we'll kind of walk you through the timeline of our task force. I know you all are somewhat familiar with it, especially Commissioner Malone, but really digging into that and then going into our subcommittee work. We had 4 different subcommittees, which we'll talk about and really talk about the recommendations that came from that and the work that will come from that. And then lastly, we'll leave you with some recommendations and final thoughts as well. So with that, I'm going to let Joel chat.
Sure. Start with introductions. I'm Joel Shaning. I bring my background, started in academia. I have a PhD in sociology, and I've spent about 20 years in sustainability work, most recently for about 5-7 years in the recycling space. Along with me on this project was my colleague, Bryce Hesteman. He's been with RRS for 7 or 8 years now. Before that, had a previous career in the recycling industry. And RS also brought a team of analysts and consultants to the project, especially Allegra Starr and Marcus Coleman. Marcus, Allegra, and Bryce couldn't join us in the meeting today, but I wanted to thank them. They each had a big role in this project, and I wanted to make sure they were recognized. And I'll hand it back to Liz.
Yes, I'm Liz Start, and I use she, her pronouns with Start Consulting Group. We're a small firm. I've worked in solid waste and materials management for almost 25 years, really with a focus on how do we create systems that are accessible for everyone and creating equitable systems. But I also geek out over talking about garbage and recycling systems. So was really excited to get to join this project and, really doing a lot of, my firm does a lot of engagement with different folks from, people in government, elected officials to community members who just want to be part of the system. So I was honored to have 3 other folks working with me. I had Lisa Ledoux, P. Hamilton, and Rebecca Stavengord all joined me, and they helped out with the facilitation of the subcommittee. So we were really excited to get to work with this group.
Thanks, Liz. So I'm going to pick up a little bit where Sean left off with a little bit of context. And we're just going to look a little bit at the state picture before we sort of zero in on the region and the county and the recommendations. We started with looking at the state context by looking at the waste, so-called waste, landfilled material generated in the state is around 6 million tons. 3/4 of that material is generated in the Northwest region, which was the original focus of this project, roughly Lane County north to the Columbia River and Cascade Mountains west to the coast. Not surprisingly, that region also accounts for about 3/4 of the state's population. Perhaps more interestingly, in that region, we recover 2.4 million tons. That's material that we otherwise divert from the landfill stream. And that's about 84% of the state generation. So the Northwest region does a little bit better at recovery than the rest of the state, and in a state that is a national leader in recycling. All that said, more can be done, more needs to be done, and we are facing a future in which there is going to be a long-term need for managing waste. Right? 84% is an admirable diversion relative to many areas of the country, but there is there maintains a waste stream that will continue to have a need to be managed. Whoops. Yeah, that's where I want to be. The SMMP was brought together. I think Benton County, much to its credit, took a step to look at this region, to bring together partners, the counties, trade associations, nonprofits, academic experts, to start to look at the region's needs from a sustainable materials management perspective. And what that means is looking at materials for their full life cycle impact. Even the material that's in the waste stream, I tend to refer to as landfill material, not waste. All of that material is material that, with better technology, better design, investments in infrastructure, is material that, at least in theory, could have an alternate end of life, or preferably a new life in some other stream. And that's the approach we took with the Sustainable Materials Management Task Force, is to try and look at the entire waste stream, or waste and recycling stream, for what the potential alternatives could be and what those strategies might be. And we'll come back to those recommendations from each subcommittee. Before I get there, I wanted to look a little bit closer at where the current waste stream goes now. If we look at the 13 county region I talked about, Lane County north and west of the Cascades, that county as a whole, about half of all the material that is currently landfilled goes east of the Cascades, is trucked or barged out 84 up the Columbia River to landfills, to distant landfills. The other half, the green lines and the sort of pink line, are a smaller 10-county region, and about 60% of that goes to Coffin Butte. If we dive in a little bit more narrowly, what we see is a huge proportion of the material generated in, once we take out the metro counties, you're looking at 60%, 62% of the material in this 10-county region going to Coffin Butte. And if you look at just the 7 counties in green, 97% of the material going to landfill goes to Coffin Butte. What this does not show is that there is the sort of map of options, right? We can see this flow chart, but it doesn't describe the reality that there is very little, there's very few other choices of where this landfill material might go. And that's a challenge for resiliency. That's a challenge for opportunities that counties and communities might make with their materials. And that's really the sort of problem statement that drives us to the SMMP work and was a driving focus of where we wanted to move our conversation in the task force. And I'll hand it back to Liz.
Thank you. So as Sean said, we can't solar panel our way out of this. We need a systems approach to this problem. You know, it's not about expanding the landfill or having more landfill space. We need less things going to the landfill, and that can only be done by taking a systems approach through a sustainable materials management plan that is focused on how do we actually reduce those numbers that Joel just showed us, you know, from the amount of waste that we're generating in the first place. So with that, you know, the task force was formed thanks to the great work of Sean and Bailey and, you know, other Benton County staff. And so I believe it was 19 members of the task force who came together. And so we started meeting in October, and we had 4 different task force meetings, or 4.5. I think we had 1 virtual meeting in there. And within those, we formed 4 different subcommittees. So we asked a lot of time of folks, you know, of those folks who were committed, if they were participating in a subcommittee. They gave about 30 hours plus each to this project. We also asked for some like outside research and review, but just in meetings alone, you know, over this 8-month process, we've had a lot of folks from the region invest a lot of great time and expertise into this project. So through that, you know, kind of Joel gave you the high level, but we really dug into the materials flows, where things are coming from, looking at the compositions of the waste streams. We looked at success stories, you know, not just in Oregon. We also had to look nationally, in a couple of cases internationally, at really good solutions that could work to really help reduce our waste systems and to keep stuff out of the landfills. And then, you know, we'd spent a lot of time gathering key findings. We worked with the experts who served on the task force, you know, to really get some great information. And so everything that we're presenting to you today reflects a culmination of all that expertise. So, you know, the RRS team did a great job of, you know, doing a lot of great in-depth research, but then taking it to the subcommittees and then the full task force and presenting them the information, and then we worked with them to get their recommendations. So these are not consultant-driven recommendations. These are driven from our local experts who understand the region and the needs that we have. So we're really proud to present these recommendations to you today. And we have them broken up into 4 different categories. Again, they all match the subcommittees. And so the subcommittees were the regional waste subcommittee, focused on, hey, what other alternatives are there? And we'll discuss that shortly. Oh, thank you. I got so excited, I forgot the clicker. Yes, so the process, you know, we set the stage by saying, like, where are we now? Where do we need to go? You know, it's not, you know, unfortunately, waste and our garbage, things that we generate, doesn't know boundaries. So it, you know, crosses over. So it was really great to have a regional collaboration on this. So we talked about, okay, what is our future state? What do we want from this process? And then, again, we presented that research. And, we did a benefits and consequences, or essentially a SWOT analysis of like, okay, if we make this recommendation, what do we have to be thinking about? Like if we pull this thread, what are the unintended, bless you. What are the unintended consequences that we might face? But we also looked at, not just the waste impacts. We looked at, what are the social impacts? What are the economic impacts? Is there opportunity for job creation? Will we be taking jobs away from folks? So we really wanted to be intentional and look at this again with a systems lens or holistically. We also had really deep conversations on like, how do we actually get this to move to the next level? Who needs to act on this? Who's going to pay for this? What barriers in legislation or policy need to be addressed? And then we came up with the recommendations. And so again, with the 4 different categories, starting with the regional waste system. Again, I really want to talk about those 4 subcommittees, but I'm going off script, y'all. So, looking at our waste stream, this is how we came up with the 4 different categories. So essentially we put it into 4 different buckets. Built environment, which means building materials, construction waste, demolition waste. It got kind of moved, but I think it's 32% of the products and packaging. That doesn't even include, or it does include textiles, clothing, things like that. So that's a big part of the waste, the biggest part. And then we looked at food and organics, which is, there's plenty of food, waste reduction programs and gleaning programs, but it's just not enough because there's still so much food waste going to the landfill. And then lastly are your mixed waste, like your residuals, diapers, things like that, that are just really challenging to have systems to dispose of. So we had 2 pathways. We could either just decrease the disposal and then also identify the most sustainable options for the remaining waste. So that's really what we wanted to focus on. And really, education is a very key part of this, but with the folks we had in the room, it really made sense of like, okay, what systems can we actually help put into place to divert that waste that's already being generated?
Can I jump in for just a
Yes,
sec before
please.
RRS, so these percentages and these subcommittees were derived from an analysis of the state waste comp data. So RRS looked at the state waste comp data and started categorizing the composition of what's in the waste stream and thinking about how this highest and this better end of life use. What are the categories of materials that we believe there are existing programs, policies, technologies that can address those materials? So that analysis is where these categories came from. And that was a conversation in the task force to sort of have the subcommittees follow those that research and those categories. So for example, we know there are good from the research, there are good programs that divert organic material. So we were able to pull that material out into a subgroup and say, okay, what are the research that can address it? And we did that all the way around. So I just wanted to emphasize these subcommittees really followed our understanding of the waste stream and the existing success stories that are out there for managing these types of materials.
Thank you, Joel. So I'm going to then go into, or I'm going to talk about the first 2 subcommittees, the regional waste subcommittee, which I facilitated. And really our desired outcome from that was to really look at regionally or Northwest region and publicly owned transfer station infrastructures and networks to recover as much material as possible, as well as looking at intermodal transport, predominantly train transport for waste, instead of trying to truck it and have really expensive transportation costs that we have. So really, the strategy components included, really looking at how do we create a collaborative solution for decision making, because we, as you could see from one of the first slides that Joel showed, our waste is going all over the state and sometimes out of state. So how do we work collaboratively to simplify that, reduce the amount of trucks, make it more efficient and cost effective for our region to dispose of its waste? Looking at a hub and spoke transfer network and infrastructure. So that way, again, we're reducing that transportation cost, we're simplifying systems, our waste isn't having to travel as far, especially by truck on the roads. We know that there's a limited transfer station infrastructure in this region. Some counties don't have transfer stations, and some are having to go further and further, especially as we see facilities closing or changing their use. And really, we didn't want to just focus on transfer stations that are focused on, a stopping point for garbage to go to the landfill. We also wanted to look at how can we actually recover items. And I think Joel will talk about that more in the products and packaging. But really, are there systems that, reusable items like furniture, large items that can be redistributed back into the community can be collected? How can, the waste system work with nonprofits for collection and distribution? How are we simplifying recycling collection? Really looking at, how do we upgrade systems to make them more cost efficient with our transfer stations? If you don't have the right technology in place, you're going to just continue to eat away at cost. And really, looking at establishing a mechanism to guarantee where the material comes, to make sure that the new transfer stations that are being created are getting the tonnage of materials that they need to be able to operate and pay for their systems. And really looking at a 10-year timeline to bring this infrastructure online. So that was really just a quick overview. And from that, we have 3 major recommendations that are divided into phases. And the first phase is to create a regional waste authority. This could be done through intergovernmental agreement, but it's really working cooperatively with other counties and local governments to take a collective look at the waste system. The hope is that by doing this, you have more control of where your materials go, saving money, and basically, the economies of scale that come with that. The next one would be to adopt a regional intermodal hub and spoke network plan. So, I know Benton County is predominantly looking at train for intermodal transportation. So really, how do we work collectively, and it has to be kind of done in order, with some sort of local intergovernmental agreement to adopt a plan to simplify how we actually move waste and other usable materials that we're keeping out of the waste stream. And then the phase 3 would be to finance and develop publicly owned transfer station infrastructures. So again, that all ties into each other. So the hub and spoke network, where you have one major facility and then smaller facilities around, really making sure, that the public is benefiting the most from these systems. So that is our regional waste subcommittee. The second subcommittee I'll be talking about is the food and organics subcommittee. And really, the desired outcome from that is that, we are sharing best practices and how we're reducing the amount of food waste, that we're getting, food to hungry people, that it's, a collaboration between local governments and nonprofits and businesses to prevent the food waste, do some education, set up systems, that food is getting to the right people, but then too, that we're not generating that food waste in the first place as well. So working very cooperatively in that system. And really, working with, there's, this Oregon DQ has some great experts who are working on like food waste campaigns. In fact, Elaine Blatt from Oregon DQ served on the task force as well. And really, it was really great to bring in those experts who really were able to help the group take a holistic look at the food waste. So, looking at, what is the data that we have? Do we have the right data? How do we, get the information that we need to reduce the food waste? How do local governments partner with nonprofits more strongly in food donation and rescue? And so, really just getting buy-in from all these different organizations is needed. And then, another big thing that came up in this group is how do you expand the recovery of food waste? So, working with nonprofits is great to get food to people who are hungry, but once that food is no longer usable, there needs to be a strong collection system And we do see some great programs, but they need to be improved, making sure everyone in, the region have access to composting systems, especially people who live in multifamily housing. So that was a big discussion point that was had. And then another, great point that was brought up in this group is it's one thing to send your items to a compost facility, but if you have no one to buy the compost at the end, it's really not a helpful market and you get backed up. So really also focusing on bringing that, compost loop full circle and getting that compost distributed to folks as well, in addition to just creating compost. So with food organics, they came up with 4 different recommendations, really to create a regional collaboration for, really food waste prevention, but then also that recovery and donation. And then the second is like that educational programming side of things, getting, even just us, in our daily lives to think about how we're reducing waste, but also looking at how commercial businesses and institutions are preventing food waste as well. They wanted to see increased coordination regionally with both government and nonprofits, as I had mentioned, because there just needs to be a better infrastructure for supporting donations, and whether that's governments collecting or connecting farmers who have excess food that would otherwise be left on the field, getting that to nonprofits, different things like that, really wanting to see that. And then really just an expansion of collection and processing and creation of end markets in the Mid-Valley region to collect more from commercial businesses and that large scale organics need that we have. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back to Joel.
Thank you. 2 additional community or subcommittees, one being the built environment and the other being products and packaging. I'll start with the built environment work. The built environment work to me was super exciting because the conversation included thinking about housing, which is the connection to another pressing statewide need. And I think the opportunity for the overlap between thinking about sustainable materials management in the context of the built environment and the overlap with the state's housing policy is a really fascinating place of work that this committee dove into. The future state identified by this committee was one in which the state and mid-Willamette Valley region are aligning strategies to address Oregon's housing needs by maximizing the use of existing structures, building with low impact materials, and diverting reusable materials from the landfill. The components of that strategy included increased recovery, new partnerships, statewide resources, integrating adaptive reuse, and updating building codes. So all of these strategies, all these sort of concepts were the ideas that the committee was working with in order to sort of blend together a set of strategies that the committee felt like could have the biggest impact. And I think, to me, one of the things that when this committee talked about human environmental health impacts along with the built environment, it's really fascinating to me to think about how reuse of materials might also have sort of pile-on or ripple effects in terms of the housing crisis. So that was a fascinating area of conversation. What the recommendation for the built environment subcommittee resulted in was a prioritization, really focusing first and foremost on improved recovery infrastructure. There's insufficient current infrastructure for recovering built environment materials. There's not enough places for people in the industry to take their material. And there is insufficient capacity to sort that material and to compile it into, one of the challenges for built environment material is to collect it and to compile it in a way that is marketable to an end user. If you collect a whole bunch of ends of cut pieces of wood, a builder doesn't want to go through and sort through that themselves, and that's not efficient. So in addition to recovering it, you need to batch it and compile it and collect it in a way that is then has a market. And this was one of the recommendations of the Built Environment Committee as well, as in the approach to developing the infrastructure, you also have to have the partnerships and the development of the end markets for that. And that's where partnerships really came into play in thinking about, as you build the infrastructure, can you integrate with housing nonprofits, other local jurisdictions, people who have a ready need for that material? The second recommendation was to integrate adaptive building reuse into state housing strategy. This is perhaps the most complex of our recommendations, thinking about how to work with multiple state agencies that are rapidly trying to address a statewide housing issue is very complicated, but it has an incredible potential to make use of ADUs that are currently underutilized, Main Street buildings that have second floor office spaces that are underutilized, a wide range of buildings that could be adapted to meet housing needs rather than deconstructed or demolished. And that also has a wide range of ripple effects. When you reuse a building rather than tear it down and build another one, that's a lot of material that's immediately diverted from landfill. Finally, in the strategy, adopt policies to require healthier, more circular building materials. The state has a lot of leadership in this. There's a few studies ongoing at the state level that can help, think things like LEED certification, but for sustainable materials rather than climate impact. A building material, concrete, wood, brick, all these things have environmental impacts from the point of extraction all the way through use, all the way through end of life. There are increasingly rating scales and systems that can rank those materials, and policies can be built on those systems to encourage and incentivize the use of healthy building materials when we use them. And those materials can also be designed for reuse and deconstruction in ways that can divert material from landfill. Moving on to the last subcommittee, the products and packaging recommendation. The products and packaging group, I think, in some ways had the most challenging task in that it had the widest range of materials to consider. Products and packaging can include almost anything. The state has the approach that the committee took was to sort of carve out considering those things for which the state or the county or the region already had good programs, right? So we have a good curbside recycling system, and it's should be getting even better in the near future. Let's not worry about that material. Let's think about other material and products and packaging types that aren't currently being addressed. And the desired future state is that the mid-Willamette Valley employs sustainable materials management for economic development and community benefit. I think in the products and packaging space is also where we can make the best use of the kind of the old reduce, reuse, recycle kind of approach. And this came close to a lot of the recommendations for products and packaging. The strategy that this subcommittee, the components that we were considering, included establishing hubs for reuse and repair. Think like repair malls, reuse cafes, collection points that can be used for a lot of different reuse and repair and diversion activity. Those activities need spaces, they need infrastructure, and they also need programmatic support. And the one thing that we also talked about a great deal in this committee was the opportunity to invest in this activity as an economic development strategy. Reuse businesses are great job creators. They're hands-on. They require, as we talked about with the built environment, they require sorting, cleaning, washing, batching. And so there's a lot of economic development potential and job creation potential in the products and packaging reuse and repair approach. Additionally, there are things that are very difficult in this realm of the material stream to handle at the county level. And this group recognized that there would be a need for state support. Things like extended producer responsibility are just hard to do at the county scale or even the regional scale, and are best done, likely best done at state scale. And outreach and education. There's an interest in. I believe that there's still quite a community interest in reduce, reuse, repair approaches. I think the national interest in the plastics crisis right now is an example of that. People are tuned into that. They care about it. They're paying attention. There's opportunity to do better education about what's in our waste stream and the impacts that it has. And I think that can be leveraged collaboratively for better outreach and education, and for people to work on behavior change for more waste diversion. So what this summed up as is invest in hubs for reuse infrastructure, programming, and economic development, create those spaces, tool libraries, repair cafes, reuse malls, pursue the policies that shift costs. That's probably a partnership advocacy for state level action, and increase the collaboration in public education for recovery and reuse, especially the community or the committee thought around bulky products. In that waste diversion data, one of the things that this subcommittee looked at closely was bulky material. Things like furniture, things like appliances, they're big, they take up a lot of space in landfills. They also tend to have multiple components and have potential chemicals and be hazardous. So that became a high priority material of focus. Finally, getting to some summary thoughts. As the 4 subcommittees did their work over the months, we regularly checked in with the subcommittees checked in with each other at our task force meetings, and we continued to look for places where these strategies across the committees could overlap or interlock or support each other. And what we came to was a recognition that across all these strategies, everything fell into, for the most part, either policy recommendations, investments in infrastructure, or investments in programs. So, and really there's the collaboration is a central focus of this, where you have regional collaboration, something like a waste authority or an intergovernmental agreement where counties can work together regionally. You can have a foundation for advocacy for state programs. You can align policies at a broader scale. You can integrate sustainable materials principles into other housing or other policy strategies. You can make regional investments that serve broader populations and have better economies of scale. You can do things like hub and spoke models that serve, all right, you can locate things so they serve communities that don't necessarily neatly follow county jurisdictional lines. And you can establish programs also that serve broader populations and feed into the infrastructures that you're making and align with the policy choices that you're making at a regional scale. What we also recognized as we got deeper into this work is that while there is a 13 county region that we began with, there is a narrower 7 county region that we have referred to loosely as the sort of mid-Willamette Valley, where at the beginning of this presentation, right, those are the counties that have the green lines that are the most dependent on Coffin Butte, and which have likely the greatest need for collaboration, for long-range planning, for shared policy approaches and programmatic support. And that's where we think that the biggest need is, but there's still a role to play for the state and for these other counties. Lane County and metro area have done some innovative work. The state has done some innovative work. The 7-county region can learn from what's happening there, adopt the things that fit for the 7-county region, the things that work. And this is a regional issue, right? There's going to be material doesn't neatly follow follow jurisdictional lines, and there's need to continue the conversation at the 13 county region, and a higher priority for those 7 counties that that are most dependent on Coffin Butte. So the final sort of recommendation to bring this all together was to consider a scenario in which we had there was a regional collaboration established, and this was kind of where we came where things all sort of began to fit neatly together, which is that regional collaboration is the foundation for advancing those policies, making the investments, creating the programs, and sustaining them over time. And that, I think, is where things really tie together. And I think I just also want to say, as we sort of sum up, Benton County, the regional collaboration is hard. It's very challenging to bring multiple jurisdictions together. Jurisdictions all have their own priorities. They have their own challenge. I think what Benton County has succeeded in doing over the last 10 months is setting an incredible baseline for that. There's been the engagement, the collaboration, the recognition. That's to be commended. And I think the energy and momentum that we have built in this is a really strong foundation for moving forward on these recommendations. And then the other thing I want to say is that the approach that we took and the engagement that we got, I think one of the outcomes that was really sort of special about this process is that these recommendations are vetted for this region. So we looked at, we have spreadsheets that are, in the double Z's of columns with examples in research. And the process we took honed those down through our task forces and our subcommittees to look at what the participants in this process felt was a fit for this region. So to me, that's really exciting to say we have a series of recommendations, and with this regional collaboration, we have people in the region who believe that these are programs, policies, investments that will work here, which is really exciting. With that, I'll hand it back to Sean.
Thank you. I'll just do a couple minutes of next steps. One, we've been talking about intermodal, transfer stations, others. We still have materials coming from RRS to give us cost estimates on those. So we can wrap our head around that. I think the bigger issue in the background is Representative Finger McDonald's bill to have a task force moving forward that came out of Ways and Means, is now in capital construction, which is a good sign. But I thought it was really great at the very end, our last meeting, task force meeting, that all the attendees said, regardless of what happens there, we still need to have a regional collaboration, exactly as Joel just said. So we're continuing our conversations with elected officials, with staff, continued communication with DEQ. This isn't stopping. This is a trend that's moving forward. It would be great for that bill to move forward, but it's going to happen either way. And then lastly, we will be having a final report working with Ann, something more tangible, and then we will have an event sometime in mid to late July. So with that, we will offer questions, comments.
Thank you very much. Questions, comments? Commissioner Shepard?
All right. Thank you. Thank you for all the work that you've done. So I had a couple questions. On page 12, we were talking about, that's the regional waste recommendation package. When you say create a regional waste authority, the recommendation that comes with that, is that the 7 county or the 13 county region? Or is that up in the air? So
I think it depends on how it's structured.
Okay.
I think and I think it depends on what you may try and do first. But yes, I think at a minimum, it's the 7 counties, and it could be all 13. In my experience, there are multiple ways you could structure that. So if it was an IGA structure, maybe it's easier to bring in all 13 counties and you just agree to what roles each are going to play through an IGA or MOU structure. If it's more formal, like an official authority, then you need much more defined governance and responsibilities for all 13. And I think if you're trying to serve the 7 counties, I think my recommendation is that the authority prioritize those 7 counties, and the other counties perhaps have a role, but it's maybe not, it's not equivalent. Like other counties could have an advisory role or some other kind of function in that structure.
That Commissioner Malone, did you have a follow-up to that point?
As one of the 2 electeds that hung in on this process, in practical terms, there's 4 counties that are different levels, but actively engaged, and that's Benton and Marion, who myself and Commissioner Cameron were paying a fair amount of attention, and then kind of private discussions with Lynn and Polk counties. And so I think that's the core group that's has the best chance of moving forward, kind of recognize the regional issue and are willing and able to devote some resources to moving forward. Counties like Tillamook and Lincoln are interested, but may not initially have the capacity to be very engaged. And then I like that Bailey is now a verb, a noun, I guess, for comparable people in different counties, and we, I think, did fairly well on that level. Lane and Lynn and who else? Anyway, I think that you have to proceed with those that recognize the issue and are willing and able to commit resources. So there's different numbers. There's 4, 7, 13, and I think maybe see it as a target, and the 4 are in the center, and then add 3 to that in the next ring, and 6, I guess, 6 more in the third ring. But just we've come a long ways in not very much time. So, I think you are to be congratulated on that.
Thank you.
Long fall.
Commissioner Shepard, back to you.
Thanks. So one comment and then a couple more questions. The mid-Willamette Valley, as a description for those 7 counties, I know a couple coastal commissioners who probably wouldn't appreciate just that as the branding of it. But yes, I understand that focus is where most of the stuff is coming from. I did want to talk just briefly around, again, on page 12, the phase 3 finance and develop publicly owned transfer infrastructure. So this to me implies that the vision of this group was that the final destination, the disposition of these materials is outside of this region. Like if we're talking about transfer infrastructure for everyone, publicly owned transfer infrastructure, that implies that it has to go somewhere that's worth putting it on a train, right? And not just a truck a couple miles. So is that was that the takeaway from this group, the vision of where trash is going to, or where waste is going to be finally set is outside of this region?
Yeah, I think well, do you want to speak to this? This was your subcommittee.
Yeah. So I think, being realistic, no matter what happens with Coffin Butte, it still has a limited lifespan. And so we have to be looking into the future. We also have to be thinking about how to act now because these programs take so long. And so, it's just the reality of where we are. We don't want landfills that are close to people, all the environmental things. So we're looking out further and further. And the solution to that is, by rail predominantly, or really expensive truck hauls. So yes, we are looking at further and further, at less populated areas or communities where, the landfill host fees benefit those communities, things like that. And so where it's like more mutually beneficial places.
Okay. We're flipping slides.
Where am I going? I was going to two pathways, right? I mean, I think ideally, right, you decrease disposal first as much as possible, but recognizing that we're not going to reach a condition of like complete circularity in the near future. There's going to be challenging materials, and those materials have to go somewhere. And currently, the vision is it's unlikely that there would be a home for those materials in the 7 or 13 county region, and they would have to go somewhere else.
Okay. Thank you. So one more comment and then my final question. So it looked like the products and packaging subcommittee and the built environment subcommittee, the recommendations that come from there do seem to be more state policy or advocacy on state policy, because looking at adopting policies to require healthier, more circular building materials, we could maybe do that here, but that's really a regional or a state thing. Recovery management and construction, adaptive reuse, those into state housing strategy, right? We're emphasizing that there, and then the products and packaging. Also, we have the Recycling Modernization Act that's coming into effect, and so these are statewide policies that that are playing into here. So I'm not. I guess question on that. How do you envision those being implemented locally? Like, what's the local nexus for these statewide policies? And then my final question, and I'll just, so I can say them both now, but how would you envision House Bill 3794, the task force bill? What work do you want it to continue that isn't already a part of this or isn't going to be an IGA? Because that bill sets up a task force that isn't this 13 or 7 county region to create a regional authority. It's a completely different task force makeup that's supposed to carry on some of this work. So what work would you want that task force to carry on? So 2 questions there.
Great. I think I'll start by saying that both the Built Environment and the Products and Packaging Committee recommendations also have elements that are intended to leverage the local infrastructure. So there are definitely components of those that have a state policy program, but I also wanted to just reiterate that things like the reuse malls or hubs or collection for demolition and construction debris, those are things that the county and the region can do. So we wanted to mix elements of things that we felt like that the county could act on. There also were things that were recommended for state policy. And I think the nexus there is sort of similar to if we use the Recycling Modernization Act as a model, in the sense that you could say if the state did a extended producer responsibility law for bulky for appliances or for furniture or for tires or for carpet or textiles or right, like all of those things would play out in or we envision them playing out in a similar way in which a producer responsibility organization is created. It's funded by producers. That funding in some way flows into communities to help manage that waste stream. So the nexus still comes down to the management of that material at the local level. Does that answer your
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So are you like similar to what we do now for mattresses? Is that
Yeah.
kind of what you're talking about? Okay.
Yep, that's great. Yeah, that's a better example. Good one.
And I'll hit the second one, your question about what the task force, we don't really have other than that, what first or second two sentences of what the guiding principle of that task force is. So I'm just going to put on my state policy hat back in Maryland. This was been a fascinating ride because there's a lot of these little details, and if I mess up, I'm going to look for this table to correct me. But like some of the building codes versus the construction and these policies of housing was fascinating. It was great to have Courtney Flowers there from the governor's office and DEQ to what could they do to look at this? I mean, we didn't stumble across, people knew about it, but to have that as a front and center issue where two state departments might not be in alignment, that's a perfect example of something that a state task force could do. And so taking that, again, getting beyond just one site or these things, how can the state guide and assist both reduction of materials as well as looking at us under a region? Because that was one of the biggest things on Look at Bailey. Doing those interviews, that was one thing that really caught me off guard is some of the lack of collaboration or constant conversation. And that alone, the state could take and run with. And so I think there's some really distinct policy efforts that the state could do. And I know that from between Department of Natural Resources and environment and these things, making sure we're all, the state is all on the same track and guiding toward common goals, as well as assisting us and having the region be a lab for DEQ, and especially on the Sustainable Materials Management Program. So I'm hoping those are some of the things. And again, looking at the materials and not just the solid waste, because that's been really the most fascinating policy opportunities I see at the state level.
I'll jump in. I guess what comes to mind for me is going back in time when we first were dreaming about this and trying to make it happen. And this project was really a recommendation of the Benton County Tox Trash process, of course, and that was this undertaking what had the most support from the community out of all those recommendations, which is why we went forward with it. And I think our intention from the beginning was we had this recognition of we're going to need to lobby the state. We're going to have to take this on the road. We're going to have to take it to the state and ask them for help because most of these tasks are not able to be accomplished just by us alone. But if you're going to take something to the state, you better make sure that you know exactly what you're asking for and make it easy for them. So I think good job. I think it's been a heavy lift. I know it's been a heavy lift. And I can't imagine the undertaking it took to get everything compiled into just this report, let alone all the work that was actually done. So a big thank you to you and all of the task force members. And besides that, I do not have any further questions. But I'll call one more time for other comments or questions. Commissioner Malone.
Yeah. Well, I think of a conversation I had a year and a half ago with Tillamook County Commissioner who had no idea that 100% of their waste went to Coffin Butte. And it's one of those things, put the can out, goes away, life is good. We've made a lot of progress in that year and a half, and especially like Commissioner Weiss said, started off with Benton County Tox Trash and then took those some of that information and formed this group, and I'm amazed at the amount of progress that we've made in less than 6 months. I think that's I thought about too hard, I'd have to go lay down. That's uh, a lot of effort, and I think we really have a roadmap how to what the next steps are, because this effort wraps up in a couple weeks, and so there's been I think a lot of conversations. Well, okay, now what? And I think we've hopefully we will get more help from the state to continue this effort, but just the regional awareness has grown a lot in a short amount of time. And if I had a nickel for every time you said infrastructure, a wealthy person,
Infrastructure.
where's the nickel? That which means we don't have it now. We need it, and we have some notion what it would look like, should look like. But we've, speaking of timetables, talking about 10 years to try to pull this together with multiple counties, and it's, I think the best way to think about it is that we are behind at this point, or I remember at our last meeting, well, this is an aggressive timetable, and I objected to that because in some ways it is aggressive, but it's also what we need to be successful and have a option or options once often viewed is no longer with us. Well, you also mentioned education, and I think that's going to be a key part of this effort. There's we're not doing a great job currently with our recovery rate. I think I got this from you, Bailey, but Benton County is in 8th place on the counties for recovery rate at 32, not quite 32%. Lane County, 53%, Marion County, 47%, Lynn County, 44%. And I think that's not necessarily our fault. We don't have the infrastructure that some of the other counties, and maybe at a later time, our Bailey can explain what the difference is in infrastructure in the different counties, and why we're less than a third. And the goal was on one of your slides was 72%, and great goal. And we've got a long ways to go. And I hope that in the planning, when you talk about a transfer station, that it's more than just a place to change vehicles, that it's also a place to, I mean, it has to have that function, but also before you put it on the train car or truck container to head over the mountains, that we've separated building materials and organic materials. And I think we have a real opportunity here, and really appreciate your efforts getting us to this point. Thanks.
County Administrator.
Yes, first of all, again, great work to all. This has been quite a feat. I just wanted to make a comment that this was an investment by the board. It was not a $500,000 budgeted, as spoken earlier. And we actually came in well under budget as we looked at this first as a holistic approach. You can't go towards a plan unless we do the due diligence, collect the data, and get all interested parties involved. Leftover funds, and I want to remind the board and folks, will be used towards a solid waste plan in the county. So that is still moving forward and targeted, and so which is exactly where we want to be. So this was presented and adopted in our new budget that will be biannual budget that will move forward. So I just wanted to bring that forward, that will be diverted to support the county's solid waste plan. And yeah, we're very excited to see what comes out of it. So great work, everyone. Thank you.
Commissioner Shepard.
Sorry, did you?
I was just going to say thank you. It's been a pleasure working with the county. It's been a great team. You have a great staff here, and Sean and Bailey, they've been outstanding to work with. And we appreciate your time today.
I just had one quick question. If you could, where did you pull the stats for the percent that go to which landfill? So like on pages 5 and 6.
State waste composition data.
Okay. Can you send a link to that? Because I'm sure people will be asking me where we pulled that from. So if I could have that. Thank you.
And it should be updated. We've been waiting for the new data for 2 years. So hopefully,
okay.
that will be very exciting and may change this picture a little bit. We don't expect it to change dramatically, but we're eagerly awaiting the state.
You know, we had good people when you say that you're very excited for new waste management numbers. So thanks.
So this chart is based on the 2016 DEQ data.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
I just wanted to end and kind of lean off what you said, Commissioner Weiss. This has been quite the road, and there's just no way this could have happened without the tremendous leadership of you three and Commissioner Rozier, you three started it, and Commissioner Shepard, unwavering support for that. I just want to thank Bailey for formally adopting me so he could walk my hand all the way through this amazing process. Rick is in the back, again, unwavering support, and Lindsay helping get this up and running. I love the fact that we all get to get a front row vision of Maura's amazing staff. These two, Mariah, the whole crew is just insane, just top notch. Anna Carly for all the work that they do, and it has been just a pleasure working with these folks the entire time. So just want to say thank you.
Thank you very much.